Deep in the land of enchantment, right off of I-25 by Bernalillo, lies the town of Placitas. The town enjoys wide open spaces and is incredibly close to nature. The most majestic of the natural wonders are the wild horses that roam freely in the Placitas area. Many of the residents enjoy the free spirit of the wild animals. However, many residents have expressed concern over the damage they cause to their property and the risk involved with horses roaming freely. A heated debate has risen over what needs to be done with the horses.
I own 4 lots, contiguous, 10 acres. I never saw a horse on that property within my subdivision boundaries until approximately 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. Those horses came into the subdivision, and I wrote one time that it was like rain on a July 4th, finally. We just walked out among them and petted them. They're not wild horses. We petted them and enjoyed them thoroughly. Took pictures. I have 300 pictures at least of horses on my computer. And then the next group came about 6 months later.
We never had horses in the canyon before this summer, but they came looking for food and water. It was so hot and dry, and there was basically no grass out on the range for them. So that was something new. I mean, we've seen them all over Placitas, but they hadn't normally found their way up that far.
Horses started influxing. I believe most of them influxed from the Indian pueblos, both the Santa Ana and the San Felipe pueblos, but certainly some were dropped off here. The history of Placitas is not a history that had a lot of horses in it. It goes back to the hippie days when maybe there were a half a dozen horses that were kept by them here, by the famous Ulysses S. Grant, who was the leader of a hippie commune here in Placitas.
These are beautiful animals. A horse, when you stand next to a horse or anywhere near a group of horses or a single horse, there is almost something spiritual, and I think that actually enters into it. Maybe for some people it's more a romantic notion. For me it's more of spiritual, but there is something there, and I enjoy it, and I do enjoy the horses. But after the second group came, I realized that they were destroying my land. I had bare spots and wallows and trails, and my vegetation was disappearing where I had plants that were before every 2-4 inches apart. Now I've got plants that are every 2 or 4 feet apart.
The land was chewed down to the nubs in the Placitas open space owned by the city of Albuquerque and the BLM, and much of the property in the neighborhoods in Placitas was because there just simply wasn't enough growth because of the drought. But the other thing that happened is that because of the inability of the horse supporters to take care of the horses because of the idea of them being wild, that resulted in the horses not being fed properly, and they became extremely malnourished, and they also became extremely dehydrated.
I had only lived here a couple years when we had our first really hot, dry summer. The village ran out of water. They were hauling water in National Guard in tank trucks for people to use, and the horses were starving to death, and that's the first I really became aware of the horse issue.
And the reason why the horses started coming our way is because there was nothing on them to eat where they came from. And some people decided to cut fences in order to allow them to come.
We have intervened and are feeding them. And it's hard to let an animal starve to death. I'm not suggesting we should, but they don't need oats and hay twice a day.
We've got over 100 horses in Placitas. Now, I'm told that there's been a roundup of a certain number of those, and the number varies whoever you talk to, even the people that were directly involved. I suspect that we still have in the neighborhood of 100 horses. 100 horses in approximately what I think is roughly 17,000 acre area is way too much. When you're combining those horses with buildings and roads and people and property rights are involved. So yeah, I don't have a problem with the horses. I hope I've made it clear. I love the horses. And I had hoped that they were being managed, but they were mismanaged. And it wasn't done by the BLM. It was done by others, some of them among us, and some of them to the north. I did own 40 acres out in an area called Ideal Acres, a very large, about a 1,200 acre subdivision that never got caught on. And it was about 15 years ago that I owned that 40 acres, and I spent a lot of time out there improving it and enjoying it and walking the entire area because there were no houses out there. Like I said, the subdivision never caught on. Still hasn't. The horses are still out there. The horses were just coming in then. Now I could take you to that subdivision. I've sold that 40 acres long since, and I could take you to that subdivision and I could show you the devastation like you wouldn't believe. You wouldn't believe that we could allow our property to get to that point. And we have.
The law says that if you don't want cattle wandering around on your property, you have to put a fence up. Well, that's a nice idea if you're a rancher or if you live out in the middle of the country, but Placitas is not the middle of the country. It no longer is, and there are 5,000 people here to prove it. And the idea of each one of those neighborhood residences putting up a fence will totally ruin the idea of Placitas open space.
Mm-hmm. Fences are an issue. Shooters and four-wheelers cut fences all the time. So even if you try to fence the horses out, that doesn't mean your fences are going to stay put.
We have several nonprofit organizations in our area which we had hoped were taking care of the horses. As a matter of fact, up to about 4 or 5 years ago, I donated several times to one of these that considers themselves the wild horse advocate, and those words are in their name. Well, we thought that they were protecting the community and the horses, but they didn't. They had an addiction to the animals, and they allowed that addiction to rule them. They started dictating that the horses should run free on all of our public and our private properties. And if I didn't like it, or you didn't like it, we should fence them out. The fact is that our own fence out laws in the state of New Mexico are written for animals that are grazing legally. These horses have no legal place to go. And I believe that they need a legal place to go. The federal government, in the form of the BLM and the Forest Service, do not want those horses on public lands because of the destruction that those animals do. And they do great destruction. I call Placitas right now the Placitas Corral. And I call the experiment that happened the failed Placitas Corral experiment.
We think birth control for the horses to manage their population is a very important part of getting to a sustainable population. San Felipe Pueblo is beginning a birth control program. Placitas would like to, and we've run up against a brick wall in terms of state laws. Sid Morgan, the district ranger with the Cibola National Forest, said that birth control is the easiest and most humane way to manage the number of horses. There's a product called PCP, which is a wonderful solution because it can be darted. You don't have to get close enough to touch the animal. It doesn't pass through the food chain. If a horse is already pregnant, it doesn't cause her to abort. And it lasts a couple years, you know. livestock board has said, oh, well, what if you dart somebody's horse that belongs to somebody? So what? It's not going to hurt her.
In order to be able to manage these kinds of horses and to be able to treat them and care for them and give them birth control and so forth and so on, they need to be in a legal place, and they need to be owned by somebody. You can't just have people wandering around injecting them with birth control without keeping track of it and no understanding what's going on with it. And they're not, and that's a big issue in Placitas.
So, yes, we've got to deal with a problem, and what do we do with the horses? The horses that could stay here, if say there were 20, that would be beautiful again. I think many people would enjoy that. And even though they have no legal place to be, including on my property or on our public properties, I think many people would enjoy that and simply look the other way. We don't go out and dispose of coyotes. We understand that they are out there and actually enjoyable. And it's a part of the living experience out here. I would appreciate that if we were able to keep a certain number of horses, but it would have to be a very small number.
I believe they belong here. I just think their numbers have to be managed, and I think we have to, frankly, have some penalties against, you know, if I went out and fed the bears, I'd find myself arrested, probably. I think we need penalties against feeding the horses in the neighborhoods.
The situation is one that's, to my mind, is going to require a series of interveners. They're going to have to include the state, the county, the sheriff's department, the county commission, the Bureau of Land Management, potentially the Forest Service, and a series of different kinds of private individuals, including the horse promoters and including people who are trying to do something about the problem.
If we want to protect our community, and any community, we've got to find a fine line between the horses, the people, the wilds, the entire area has to be protected and balanced. The horses are way out of balance. Possibly the people are too, or from a horse's opinion, people are definitely out of balance, and in my opinion, sometimes too.
Every time we see the horses come by, we get excited about them. I mean, we actually get emotionally excited about them coming through. And every time they come through, we enjoy seeing them because they've got new babies, they've got colts, they've got, and they're beautiful horses. But we also know that there's other neighbors that are dealing seriously with the damage that they're doing.
If we don't come up with a solution, the people who want them removed are going to win out. They'll be gone, which I think would be a shame. I think they have historical significance.